Well, let's get some more analysis on this story and World Press Freedom Day. And we can cross to New York and speak to Jodie Ginsberg, who's president of the Committee to Protect Journalists. That's an independent NGO which promotes press freedom worldwide. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Half of these 67 killings of journalists happened in 3 countries. That's Ukraine, Mexico and Haiti. I mean, a really striking figure there. What are some of the other main findings in the year 2022's report?
Well, in the year 2022, there were a number of things that were striking. The 50% increase in the killings of journalists, and that's not necessarily to be unexpected. There was the war in Ukraine, but what's interesting about the figures, as you said, is 2 of those countries are not technically at war in the top 3, Haiti and Mexico, and that's a feature of the year that journalists are really under threat everywhere. More journalists in more countries are being threatened in more ways than ever before. CPJ, last year we recorded a record number of journalists in jail, and that again is indicative of the kind of pressure that journalists are under worldwide.
I think I know the answer to this question already. I was going to ask, were there any bright spots at all in 2022?
Very few bright spots in 2022. As you heard, Ireland broke the Nordic stranglehold on the top spots of press freedom, and that's a great and positive thing. But unfortunately, in general across the world, we are seeing a decline in press freedom, and that's in part because we're seeing democratic declines more broadly. And when you see restrictions being increased, people's rights being taken away, often the first people to be targeted are journalists who are exposing those trends.
Tell us a bit more about what the CPJ does to promote press freedom around the world.
The Committee to Protect Journalists does a number of things. We try to raise awareness of the threats to journalists by documenting the cases of journalists who've been threatened, documenting the arrests, documenting the attacks. We advocate on their behalf, campaign for journalists to be released from jail, as we're doing with many journalists around the world. And we provide assistance. So we provide direct assistance to journalists who are in need of help. And unfortunately, that is an increasing number. Many journalists are being forced into exile rather than face either imprisonment or indeed death in their own countries.
Yeah, we mentioned the number of journalists killed during 2022, 67 journalists in total. But it isn't just killings, is it? You've already alluded to it there. Hundreds of journalists were actually imprisoned last year as well, weren't they?
Yes. The killing of journalists is the tip of the iceberg. It's the ultimate form of censorship. But there are many other ways to silence journalists. And increasingly, one of those ways is using legal threats, putting journalists in prison. So we saw a 20% increase last year in the number of journalists jailed. And that's across the piece. The world's highest jailer of journalists on the CPJ records last year was Iran. And that's following the protests there. It shows you what governments want to do, what regimes want to do in order to shut down free and independent reporting. They often turn to imprisonment, to jailings. But again, that's not the only method that people are using to silence journalists. Increasingly, we're seeing online threats made against journalists. And that's in very many countries, including in France, the UK, and where I am in the United States.
I can see it, but I'm not sure that all our viewers can. You're wearing a badge, Free Evan. Just talk us through that and what you can tell us about Evan, who in fact has a relationship with this channel.
So this is a badge in support of Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was arrested and is being wrongfully detained by Russia. He was arrested on March the 29th simply for doing his job. He's been accused of espionage. He's a reporter. He's a journalist. He's been arrested for doing journalism. And what's striking about that case is, while we have seen essentially the hollowing out of domestic reporting in Russia, some news operations had been able to operate somewhat in Russia and some foreign news outlets. And Evan's arrest and detention sounds a very troubling and powerful signal to foreign news outlets that essentially they're not welcome. And so this is part of the campaign for his release, but also for all of those journalists who are unfairly detained and being targeted for their journalism. Journalism is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. I mean, there does seem to be an argument, doesn't it, that the structure of the media industry as a whole is partly to blame for perhaps a diminished public trust in the media. And what I mean by that is that there's consolidation that's taken place in recent years, and that's meant a lot of power in too few pairs of hands, particularly in Western countries. Do you agree with that?
It's certainly true that a free and independent media and for media to do its job effectively of holding power to account, we need a pluralistic media. We certainly can't have concentration where one media mogul, one government has control of the entire narrative. It's really important that we have as many voices, as many news outlets as possible, providing as broad a picture as possible of what's going on in our world.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, you've already touched on this subject as well, lies and sort of disinformation doing the rounds on social media. I mean, restoring public trust is another key issue. I think a lot of people would say they don't trust the news they're given in quite the way that they used to.
That's correct. And trust generally in public institutions, in politicians and others, has fallen away over recent decades, and that's true of journalism. And it's really important that we at the Committee to Protect Journalists, as journalists, we help people reconnect with the importance of journalism. Journalism plays a crucial role in our everyday lives. We turn to the news for information about the weather, for transport information, but to keep us safe. Think about the pandemic and how important a role journalism played in helping us understand the science and how we could keep ourselves safe. And I think as journalists, we don't tend to like to talk about ourselves. We don't tend to like to talk about journalism. And I think one way that we can help rebuild trust is to help people reconnect with that value that journalism has.
OK, well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us on what I'm sure is a very busy World Press Freedom Day for you. Thank you very much indeed. Jodie Ginsberg, President of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Thank you.